I think that it's very important to understand that the real estate area of business consists of a certain type of practitioner whose main objective is to get a property sold, even if he or she has to assist a potential purchaser in acquiring a loan to buy that property. And it's a hit and run situation. They're an in-between person, and they leave.
Right.
The not so savvy investor is left with the property with a mortgage that he can't handle.
Right.
And the people who induce them.
And who are we talking about? We're talking about speculators, developers, brokers, lending institutions. Who are the players here?
I think we're talking about a combination of all of the above. When you consider a community as a whole, or even a borough like Brooklyn that's currently plagued with a serious foreclosure epidemic, it could be someone with enough information or knowledge who works within the bank and is willing to pass off on certain types of loans. It could be a real estate broker. It can be an attorney. It can be a private real estate speculator. In short, it's an entire atmosphere of speculation that different people can engage in.
Okay. So a landlord, someone who's looking to own a home in Bushwick, they take out a mortgage they can't afford. They very quickly, I'm assuming, they have a problem paying back their mortgage. This ultimately results in some type of foreclosure action. They're in danger of losing their home, or they lose their home. And so what happens to the tenant in that moment where they're in foreclosure? What happens to the tenant?
Well, in that situation, being in foreclosure means that the owner has defaulted on their mortgage payments, and a suit has been brought against them by a lender, which implies that the owner doesn't have the capital or resources necessary to operate or maintain the building.
Right.
So one of the first things that the tenants experience is a decrease in services.
Okay.
When the situation gets pretty severe, depending on how poorly resourced the owners are, they may disappear altogether.
Okay.
There's nothing they can do to stop the foreclosure, and so the actual taking away of the property by the lender is inevitable, and they just leave town.
So even before the tenant is facing eviction, the conditions in the house start to go down, right?
The conditions, the basic services start to diminish.
Okay.
But something very important also occurs in that tenants lose contact with the owner of the property.
Right.
And it's not enough for a tenant seeking to, say a disabled tenant, seeking to fill out an application for a disability rent increase exemption, and they need their landlord's information. For them to be told, well, the building is in foreclosure.
Right.
It doesn't solve their immediate need.
Right.
So we see a lot of tenants, in Bushwick particularly, where they are currently living in buildings where they have no idea who owns their building,
Right.
which is something that shouldn't be happening, but is happening on a massive scale.
So where do you step in? What are you able to do for the tenants, and are you able to do anything about the predatory lending that's occurring as well?
We would like to do more about the predatory lending, but currently the only things that we really can do are try to protect tenants.
And how do you do that?
And we do that by contacting them, providing them with information, organizing them, whether on a building level or on a community level in large meetings when they share, for example, the same landlord on multiple properties. I think the most important thing for them is having access to information, for them to know who their landlord is. If they're a senior citizen or a disabled person and they have some need to know a landlord's address, or even for a public assistance application, for example, that we can help them kind of fill that gap of not knowing who to hold responsible.
And you going to court with them, I'm assuming?
We spend over the last 4 or 5 years, we've spent way too much time in housing court. It's a very eviction-friendly environment in New York City right now, particularly in communities like Bushwick and Bedford-Stuyvesant. Either the not-so-savvy investors, as a result of not having sufficient rental income from the properties, decide that their only option is to attempt to evict tenants, or the inducers, speculators, they decide that what makes a building more attractive is for it to be completely unoccupied by families. So we deal with many situations where an entire building of wholesale evictions, eviction attempts. We've been pretty successful at stopping many evictions, but we see it on a daily basis.
So foreclosure, eviction, abandonment, violations. You know, before you mentioned the term gentrification, and I held back jumping into it, but now I'm going to jump into it. It seems like this kind of lays the land for conditions to kind of overwhelm the community. It seems like it's a systematic taking apart of a neighborhood. So what is happening in Bushwick? I know that there was actually a New York Times article, I'm sure you're familiar with it, a few months ago that talked about Bushwick being the new hot neighborhood. Now, this depiction of a hot neighborhood seems to contrast with what you just described. How is the hot neighborhood and what you just described, how are they part of the same phenomena?
Bushwick, as the next new hot neighborhood, is something that is really occurring. What we've found over the last 4 or 5 years is that so-called gentrifiers, as traditionally defined, are moving into Bushwick, but they're occupying previously non-residential space, converted manufacturing spaces.
Okay.
So we haven't seen that direct kind of competition for apartments between low-income families who've been in Bushwick for many years and newcomers. What we have seen is this kind of unrestrained speculation aiming to kind of lay the foundation for turnover.
I mean, is this a conspiracy? I hate to use the word, but I mean, are there some people sort of standing back there and kind of moving people around on like pieces on a chessboard?
I think it's completely unrestrained real estate practices that say we can make money, let's make it.
Right.
We don't have to consider the results of our actions.
Right.
After all, we're only buying 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 buildings.
Right.
We're not changing the community. The problem is that there are about a couple of thousand people buying buildings with the same kind of intentions.
Right.
And so it is a conspiracy of sorts, in that it's the same tactics, the same practices, the same results, and it's definitely leading to tremendous pressures on families, particularly those who are low income or educationally challenged, to compete in a so-called housing market